The show where there are no penalties, nothing is offside, and everything is fair game. This is The Gloves Are Off.
Hello and welcome to another edition of The Gloves Are Off. I'm Moses Woldu. We got another great show for you this week. A lot of topics involving some interesting characters around there. Speaking of interesting characters, I'm pleased to be joined by this man here, Andrew Brethauer. How's it going?
Oh, it's going. That's most I'm going to say about it. It's going.
Editor, Mr. Source, sports
Not
editor.
Not anymore.
No, you've upgraded.
Downgraded back to sports editor. I'm happy.
Really? Well, that's what I said. You're a sports editor.
We got a new guy. We're happy.
Are you?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that they're very happy to have you in some way, shape, or form. We'll see what happens in the future in the next few minutes here. Speaking of a guy who's got a bright future and a guy who's really helped out, captain of the Lloydminster Junior Wee Bandits, I'm pleased to be joined by Brody Pollard. Of course, I know we've been trying to kind of get you on the show for a while. It's been up and down. Your schedule is a little bit tough, but we're pleased that you could take the time and hang out with us for a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Moses. I mean, it worked out today, and I'm happy to be here.
All right. Well, we'll get things going then, and we'll talk about something that I guess Canada was all involved in. We'll talk about the Toronto Blue Jays. No Alex Anthopoulos. A lot of people were kind of panicking, and by they, I'm talking about fans, thinking the doom is here. The biggest free agent, if it were, to sign was AA, their general manager. And, of course, the relationship he has with the guys, Josh Donaldson said he owes him, I guess, tons because he brought him in from Oakland, which wasn't the greatest of situations with the issue with Billy Beane. Brought him here, and he is one of the candidates for AL MVP. Then you look at Jose Bautista, who was very pleased in terms of the pickups he had. But now with the new change, the new president's come in for Paul Beeston and the new CEO, we're talking about Mark Shapiro. He's kind of seeing things a little bit differently. Is this going to be, I guess, the status quo remain for the Blue Jays? Should there be no panic? Or will we see a big change with the Jays coming up? And we'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I really don't think Shapiro would be very smart coming in and making too many major changes to the Blue Jays, especially with not only representing a city but a country with this ball club. And if you were to do something drastic that hurt the team in a very, very negative way, I don't think the country would be very supportive of the change of bringing him in the first place. And he'd be out just as quick as he came in my opinion. Just
imagine being the Blue Jays PR guys right now and having to go around this mess, because that's what it's going to be. Any move he makes that's any negative is going to be blown up in his face. And would Alex Anthopoulos have made that move? That's the problem now they're in. Shapiro's going to have to be really cautious, walk on eggshells with everything he does, which this is a team that was 2 wins away from getting to the World Series, and now you have to walk on eggshells. That's not a great situation to be in.
It seems weird. The good news is, though, they did sign some of the key guys, or at least picked up the options for R.A. Dickey, Jose Bautista, and Edwin Encarnacion. So you got the core in terms of the bats, and you do have a pitcher who can still be serviceable as a 3 or 4 guy in the rotation. But you look at where the Jays are, where Shapiro is. This is a guy who's had plenty of experience taking teams to World Series, building contenders. He spent plenty of time in Cleveland in their heyday when they were pretty strong. Do you guys see that maybe he is actually a good fit, and this is just a little blip? Like in terms of the whole, I guess, exaggeration that people have because Alex Anthopoulos is gone.
Well, yeah, I think he'll fit in well, and like you were saying there, he is walking on eggshells right now, and he's really thinking about every decision he makes. I mean, he's already talking about replacing the Alex Anthopoulos or whoever he's bringing in as another guy to fill in, and he said in his interview that he really needs to look at every different scenario and to find the right fit for this organization and for this city and this country. And he's really keying in on the fact that he knows that he's got a lot of people watching him right now. And I believe he's going to do well for the Blue Jays.
Okay, let's move on to baseball. We'll still stick with the theme, but talk about the Kansas City Royals, a team that beat the Blue Jays and also ended up being World Series champions for the first time in 30 years. You look at what this team has done throughout the years, considering even they lost last year. They were more of a miracle team, an unknown. Just snuck into a wild card spot, made it to the World Series, and lost to the San Francisco Giants. This time around, they said, you know what, we got bigger things. They got deeper. They picked up Ben Zobrist, of course, during the trade deadline. All of a sudden, the bats are coming alive. They have guys who are coming out and actually producing off the bench. Best record in baseball. They ended up getting home field advantage throughout. They won the whole thing. Andrew, are they the best team. How impressed are you by Kansas City's run?
Of course they're the best team. They won it all, and that's what matters the most.
But the best team did win.
The best team did win. And if you look at what they did last year, and I think that's what's more impressive. Everyone has those one-and-done years. You think that's it. And they came out and said, no, we're a real team. We're a real contender. We're going to hit the ball. We're going to run. We're going to play like aggressive. And that's what they did throughout the whole World Series. And that's the more impressive thing to me is that they were almost defiant in that everyone was so against, okay, Kansas City 1 year. No, we're going to do this, and this is going to be a continuous thing for the next coming years.
Mm-hmm. And they didn't give up, ever. I mean, there's a couple games there in the World Series where they were down in the last couple of innings, and they found a way to make it happen. And the best teams do find a way to make it happen when they can. Unfortunately, the Jays couldn't do that against the Royals, and as bummed out as it was about that, I think I agree the best team did win the World Series.
They also had 8 come-from-behind wins, which was truly remarkable. All right, let's get to this topic, and it's something that a lot of people in Canada haven't really had the issue with the high dollar, but now with the dollar going low, kind of reminds you of, say, the times in the early 90s where Canadian teams couldn't really get a bite in terms of the playoffs. You had a few that were successful, Toronto, for example, because the Leafs, I'm going to choose the NHL, because they had the moolah. Montreal, same thing. But teams like Edmonton, Calgary, they had to build their teams. Now, another hurdle is starting to come with a new government, and I'm not saying it's just them, but of course, the reports with higher taxes, for higher brackets, it might be a deterrent, some are saying, for those high-priced players to come to Canada. So you look at the Toronto Raptors, for example, the Toronto Blue Jays, as you mentioned, Brody, with the guys they had, David Price, etc., they're going to be taxed a lot higher if they do sign Price, for example. Batista will be taxed a little bit higher if it goes through. But not to be political here, but does a higher, I guess, tax increase on those who are making the more wealthy deter top players to come north of the border? Or do you think that's just a simple myth?
Oh, it's for sure. They talk about all the time when you go play in Florida and you can keep all your money. You can go play in different states and keep all the money you make and come to Canada. Now you're 33% taxed. It creates an unfair advantage, but that's sports. And if you want to go multi-cultures and multi-countries, you're going to have that problem. The problem is going to be when you're trying to build a team. Montreal right now, so the Canadians, would have no problem bringing in a player who wants to win a cup. But someone like, say, Edmonton, who's in the rebuild, or Vancouver, you don't really know where they are going to have problems bringing those high-quality players in if we're going to tax you a bunch of money on it.
And it was because of the study called Home Ice Tax Disadvantage that released saying the Canadian Taxpayers Federation in 2014 found that 50% of NHL unrestricted free agents last year moved to teams that had lower taxes. If you, for example, Brody, were in an elite player, would you want to stay in Canada knowing this?
I think it depended on where I was at and with what contract I was being offered. I mean, you look at it as being a top-end player, you're making millions anyway, so why does it matter? And you're still going to be bringing home a ton of money as a top-end guy, and the taxes shouldn't really hurt you. But the guys that are only making the $500,000 a year, the minimum that may not have a future in the NHL, they're more looking for a contract that they can maybe get more games in, so maybe they can fill their pensions and fill their pockets in another way that the taxes wouldn't affect them at all, right? Like, they can get taxed on that, but they'll still get their money back in the long run through a pension. They're more looking for a contract, and not necessarily where they play, but how long they can play there.
My fear of this whole thing, if it does happen, if there is a big fear, or concern, I should say, not so much a fear, is that if these players, I guess, to bring in a player, these teams north of the border are going to have to compensate them much more than their value is worth, and that's going to hurt the game in the long run, because that's been an issue for the NHL. That's why they had a whole, I guess you'd say, salary cap in the first place, was to avoid things like this. It'll be interesting to see, but I don't think it's going to be dire straits, but it is something that will be looked at for sure. All right, guys, we're going to take a commercial break. When we return, we're going to talk about some new developments in the Patrick Kane saga coming up.